Weeks passed and the silence from deep space grew heavier. Not with emptiness, but with waiting. Lisa Drew stood on the balcony of her small home in Oregon, the wind cool against her face. She watched the sunset paint the hills gold and red. It felt strange to be back on Earth after everything, yet nothing had truly changed. People still rushed to work. Children still laughed in the streets. But now every human carried a quiet new weight. They were the weavers, whether they believed it or not. Princess Ilara had returned to her homeworld. But messages came daily, not through official channels but through soft pulses of light, coded in old Earth songs, nursery rhymes, lullabies, things no alien database could fake. Lisa knew it was Ilara testing the thread between them. One evening a message arrived wrapped in the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It said, "The devourers are waking." Lisa did not panic. She called a meeting not with generals or politicians, but with poets, teachers, gardeners, mothers, and old men who remembered stories from their grandparents. She gathered them in a field outside Portland under open sky and told them what Ilara had said, not as a warning but as a request. They listened. Some cried, some laughed, some fell silent for a long time. Then a woman named Maria, who taught 3rd grade, stood up and said, "My students draw pictures of stars every Friday. They always add a door in the sky. Maybe they know something." We forgot that night the first human memory beacon was built not of metal or plasma but of voices, hundreds of them speaking at once, telling tales of kindness, of loss, of courage, of ordinary days made bright by love. The sound was sent into space, not as a weapon, but as a shield in the Virith homeworld. Ilara stood before her people in the great hall of echoes. She held a small crystal that glowed with Earth's song. Her council watched in awe, for the crystal did not just play sound. It made the air shimmer with color, with feeling, with warmth. This is how they fight. She told them, not with fire but with feeling. The devourers cannot feed on what is remembered. They starve in the presence of shared joy. Skeptics remained, but even they could not deny the change in the stars. For the first time in centuries, the void between galaxies flickered, not with cold darkness but with faint pulses of human memory. Meanwhile on Mars, a small research outpost picked up a strange signal, not from Earth, not from the Alliance, but from the edge of known space. It was a whisper, thin and broken but unmistakable. It spoke in English, words half lost in static. "Help us, they are coming." Lisa received the message within hours. She recognized the voice. It belonged to Dr. Helen Cruz, a biologist, who had vanished 2 years ago during a deep-range survey mission. Everyone assumed her ship had been lost to a solar storm, but now her voice returned like a ghost from the dark. Ilara arrived on Mars 3 days later, aboard a silver vessel shaped like a falling leaf. She stepped onto the red dust without helmet or suit, her body shielded by a field of soft light. She found Lisa in the comms bunker staring at the looping message. "You believe it is real?" Ilara asked. Lisa nodded. "They took her. They kept her alive for a reason, to bait us," Ilara said softly, "or to warn us. Either way, we have to go." Lisa said, "The council will never allow it," Ilara replied. "They fear the devourers more than they honor the weavers. Then we go without them." Lisa said, "So they prepared in secret using an old Alliance scout ship retrofitted with human tech and Virith shielding. They called it the Lullaby. Not for its weapons, but for the song it carried in its core, a recording of 1,000 voices singing, 'You are not alone.' The journey took 17 days through folds of space that twisted time and light. On the 8th day, Maria, the teacher, sent a new drawing from her class. It showed 2 women, one with silver eyes, one with brown, standing back to back against a storm of shadows. They held hands, and from their joined palms grew a tree with stars for fruit. Lisa pinned it to the ship's console. On the 16th day, the devourers appeared, not as ships, not as monsters, but as absences. Patches of space where light died and sound vanished. They drifted toward the lullaby, silent and hungry. Ilara activated the memory beacon. The ship filled with voices, not loud, but steady stories of first kisses, of lost dogs, of baking bread, of holding a newborn for the first time. The devourers slowed, then recoiled as if burned. They could not consume what was held tightly in love. "We are close," Lisa said, pointing to a faint signal ahead. There in the black floated a derelict station. its hull scarred and cold, but inside a single. Light blinked red, then green, then red again, a human pattern, a distress rhythm. They docked carefully, the airlock hissed open, and inside they found Helen Cruz alive. But changed her eyes, held galaxies, her skin faintly glowing. She did not speak. At first she only stared at Lisa, then at Ilara, then she whispered, "You came. Of course we came." Lisa said. Helen smiled weakly. "They showed me what they are. They are not evil. They are empty. They were once like us, but they forgot how to remember. And now, they eat memories to feel real even for a moment." Ilara knelt beside her. "You are safe now, but I am not alone." Helen said, "There are others, thousands trapped in the hollow places between stars. Their minds fading because no one remembers them." Lisa understood. Then the true danger was not invasion, but erasure. If the Devourers consumed enough memories, they would grow strong enough to swallow entire worlds, not by destroying them, but by making them forget who they were. "We have to bring them back." Lisa said, "How?" Ilara asked. "By remembering them out loud." Lisa said, "Every name, every face, every story we can find back on Earth." Maria gathered her students again. This time they did not draw, they spoke. They named every missing person from every news report, from every old photo album. They said names like Ben Carter, who vanished hiking in Colorado in 2041, or Lila Nguyen, last seen on a ferry in Vietnam in 2038. They spoke their names into microphones, and the names flew into space, wrapped in song on Titan. A colony of miners began singing old work chants into the void on the moon. Gardeners recited the names of every flower they had ever grown in the thin soil. The Devourers trembled at the derelict station. Helen led Lisa and Ilara deeper inside, too. A chamber where time bent like cloth on the walls floated. Faces faint and flickering, the forgotten. The lost, the ones no one spoke of anymore. Lisa stepped forward and began to speak. Not of heroes or legends, but of small things, of a man who always shared his lunch, of a girl who rescued stray cats, of a grandmother who taught her granddaughter to knit. Even when her hands shook, as she spoke, the faces grew brighter. The chamber warmed. Ilara joined her voice, weaving Virith lullabies around Lisa's words. Helen added her own memories of Earth, of rain on rooftops, of the smell of coffee in the morning. The Devourers outside did not attack. They listened, and for the first time in 10,000 years, one of them made a sound. Not a hunger, not a growl, but a sigh, almost like relief. It remembered. The ripple spread faster than light across the galaxy. Worlds that had long silenced their past began to speak again. The Krell descendants whispered the names of their drowned cities. The Zenth sang the songs of their extinct birds. Even the Alliance elders opened sealed archives and read aloud the names of those erased in the name of order. The Devourers did not vanish, but they changed. They drifted away from the light, not in defeat, but in search of their own lost memories. Helen returned to Earth with Lisa and Ilara. She walked barefoot on grass for the first time in years, and cried not from sadness but from the simple joy of feeling Earth beneath her feet. In the weeks that followed, no grand treaty was signed. No new empire rose. Instead, something quieter happened. Humans began to tell more stories to each other on street corners and kitchens over crackling radios. They shared memories like Breed. Ilara stayed. She built a small home near Lisa's, not as a princess but as a friend. She learned to bake bread. She learned to cry at sad movies. She learned the weight of a hand held in silence, one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk. Lisa asked, "Do you think we really are the Weavers?" Ilara smiled. "I think Weavers are not a race or a bloodline. They are anyone who refuses to let love be forgotten." Lisa nodded, and in that moment she knew the fight was not over, but it was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to every voice that chose to speak, every heart that chose to remember. Far out in the dark, a single Devourer drifted alone. It paused near a dying star, and from its hollow core, it made a sound soft and broken. It was trying to sing, and somewhere on Earth a child heard it in a dream and hummed the tune back. The end. She rejected the alliance until the alien princess froze at the sight of a human. The council chamber of the Galactic Alliance shimmered with cold blue light, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed faintly with every word spoken. Around the circular table sat representatives from 12 star systems, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from. Scaled, feathered, metallic, gelatinous among them. Commander Lisa Drew sat alone, the only human in the room, her uniform crisp but worn, her expression unreadable. For 3 long cycles, Earth had been invited to join the Alliance for 3 long cycles. Lisa had said no, not out of pride, not out of fear, but because she remembered what happened to the last species that trusted them, the Krell whose homeworld now orbited as a silent ring of dust around a dead sun. The Alliance called it integration. Lisa called it erasure. Today was different today. The High Emissary herself had arrived, an honor never before granted to a non-member. Species whispers filled the chamber as the great doors parted. A figure glided in, tall and slender, her skin the color of twilight, eyes like molten silver. Princess Ilara of the Virith, heir to the oldest throne in the known galaxy, draped in robes. Woven from starlight threads, she moved without sound, her presence silencing even the hum of the air recyclers. All eyes turned to Lisa. The princess's gaze followed, slow and deliberate. Then, without warning, Ilara stopped her breath, caught her silver. Eyes widened, the chamber fell utterly still for a full 10 seconds. The princess of the Virith stood frozen, staring at the human woman as if seeing a ghost or a god. Lisa did not flinch. She met the aliens, stare evenly, though her pulse hammered in her throat. She had expected negotiation, perhaps threats disguised as diplomacy. Not this. The council elder, a moss-covered being named Kor, cleared his throat. Princess Ilara, this is Commander Lisa Drew of Earth. She has declined our offer of alliance. For the 3rd and final time, Ilara did not look away. You are human, she whispered, her voice like wind through glass chimes. Yes, Lisa replied. You bleed, re-dies. You dream in color. Lisa hesitated. I suppose I do. A strange expression crossed Ilara's face, wonder, sorrow, recognition. She stepped forward, ignoring protocol, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the council. She stopped just an arm's length from Lisa and raised a trembling hand, stopping short of touching her. They told us you were gone, Ilara said softly, wiped out in the great silence along with the others, but you survived. You all survived. Lisa frowned. What are you talking about? Ilara turned to the council. You do not understand. This is not merely another species seeking shelter. This is the last of the Weavers. The room erupted. Kor slammed his root-like fists on the table. Impossible. The Weavers vanished 10,000 cycles ago. They were myth, not myth, Ilara said, her voice hardening. Memory, sacred memory. The Weavers were the first they shaped. The void into stars. They taught the young races how to speak, how to build, how to hope when the Devourers came. The Weavers sacrificed themselves to seal the rift between dimensions. We believed none remained. She looked back at Lisa, her silver eyes glistening. But you are here, and if you are here, then the Devourers may return. Lisa's mind reeled. Earth's history held no tales of cosmic creation or ancient wars. Only myths of gods and monsters, of floods and fires. Could those be echoes of something? Really don't know what you're talking about, Lisa said honestly. Humans are just people we farm. We fight, we love. We barely made it off our own moon before our planet started choking on its own smoke. Ilara smiled faintly. That is the way of the Weavers. They never claimed glory. They worked in silence and shadow. They became ordinary so others could be extraordinary. She turned fully to the council. The Alliance does not offer Earth membership. Earth offers the Alliance a second chance. If the Weavers walk among us again, then the Devourers may already be stirring in the dark between galaxies. We must prepare and we must listen. Kor scoffed. You would base galactic policy on the word of a child and the presence of a primitive. Ilara's gaze turned. Icy. Call her primitive again, Elder, and I will strip your house of its voting rights. The blood of the Weavers flows in her veins. I would know it anywhere. Lisa felt a chill. She had no proof, no ancient artifact, no hidden power yet. Something in Ilara's certainty made her doubt her own doubts. Had humanity forgotten its true origin? Had their myths been warnings all along? What do you need from us? She asked. Your stories, Ilara said. Your songs, your art, your pain. The Devourers feed on silence, on forgotten things. The Weavers fought them with memory, with connection, with love, even when it hurt. Lisa laughed softly. We've got plenty of that. Then perhaps Ilara said, you never stopped being Weavers. You just forgot the name days. Later, the Alliance Council reconvened. This time, Lisa did not sit alone. Ilara stood beside her, a silent declaration when Kor opened his mouth to protest. Ilara raised a single hand. Earth will join the Alliance, she announced, not as a member, but as its heart. And if any world dares to dismiss them, they dismiss the legacy that saved us all, no one argued. Back on Earth, news spread fast. Humans rejoiced, confused but hopeful. They did not know they were weavers. They only knew they had been seen finally by someone who mattered. Lisa returned, home not as a soldier but as a bridge. She carried no weapons, only questions, and in the quiet hours she began to collect stories. Old ones, new ones, sad ones, silly ones. She sent them into the stars, wrapped in light and code. Far away in the deep void, something stirred, not with hunger but with fear. For the first time in 10,000 years it heard the sound it dreaded most, the sound of remembering, and on a small blue planet, a woman named Lisa Drew smiled because for the first time she understood why her grandmother always said never stop telling stories. Months had passed since the lullaby returned and the world felt softer, not because the dangers had vanished but because people no longer faced them alone. Lisa Drew walked through the streets of Seattle not in uniform, but in a simple blue jacket. Her boots scuffed from rain, and miles she passed cafes where strangers shared stories over coffee. She saw murals on brick walls painted with faces of the missing, now remembered children, played games that mixed Earth songs with Vireth chants, and no one thought it strange. Lara lived in a small house on the edge of the city surrounded by wildflowers. She wore human clothes, now jeans and sweaters, and she learned to make pancakes, though they often came out burnt. Helen Cruz taught biology, again, but her lessons now included myths from a dozen worlds. She told her students that memory was the oldest kind of magic, yet peace was fragile. One morning a signal came not from the Devourers, but from the Alliance Council itself. Kor the Moss, covered elder, had gathered a faction of worlds that feared what Earth had awakened. They claimed the memory beacons were weapons disguised as songs, that the weavers were not saviors, but manipulators, weaving control through emotion. They demanded Earth shut down all beacons or face isolation. Lisa read the message in silence, then handed it to Ilara, who crumpled it without reading the whole thing. They are afraid, Ilara said. Fear makes even wise beings stupid, but we cannot fight them. Lisa replied, we barely survived our own wars. We do not need to fight. Ilara said we need to invite them. So Lisa sent a reply, not with arguments, but with an invitation. She asked every world in the Alliance to send one person, not a diplomat, not a soldier, but someone who remembered someone they had lost, a parent, a friend, a pet, a home. The response surprised everyone. From the icy moons of Krell came an old fisherwoman who carried a locket with a faded photo of her son. From the desert world of Zenth arrived a young musician who played a flute carved from his grandfather's bone. Even Kor sent someone, a quiet botanist who tended the last living tree of his people. They gathered in a field outside Seattle, under open sky, just as Lisa had done before this. Time there were no speeches, only circles of chairs and warm drinks and soft light. Lisa began by telling the story of her father, a mechanic who fixed broken things not because he was paid, but because he hated to see anything useless. He once spent 3 days rebuilding a neighbor's toaster just to see her smile. Others followed. The fisherwoman spoke of her son who loved the sea so much he learned to speak to whales. The musician played a song his grandfather taught him about rain on dry sand. The botanist described the scent of his trees' blossoms like honey and smoke. Ilara sat among them, silent until the end. Then she stood and said, my people do not cry. We were taught tears were weakness. But since I met humans, I have learned that tears are not weakness, they are proof that something mattered. And she wept in that moment. The fear in the room melted. Not because the problems disappeared, but because no one felt alone in carrying them. Kor watched from a distance through a view screen. On his ship he saw the botanist hug the fisherwoman. He saw his own people laugh with humans over burnt pancakes. He saw something he had not witnessed in centuries. True connection without contracts, without conditions. He did not speak, but he did not order the beacons silenced either. Back in the field as night fell, someone began to sing an old earth folk song. Others joined in. Not all knew the words, but they hummed the tune, and the sound rose into the stars, warm and steady. But not all threats came from politics. Deep in the asteroid belt, a mining colony stopped responding to hails when a rescue ship arrived. They found the station empty. No signs of violence, no damage, only silence and a single word scratched into the wall. "Remember Lisa," and Ilara went at once inside the station. Everything was frozen mid-motion, cups of coffee, still warm tools left on workbenches, but no people. Only a strange hum in the walls, like a heartbeat made of Staticellin, analyzed the air and found traces of a memory-dampening field not strong enough to erase but enough to blur thoughts, to make names slip away. "They are testing," Lisa said. "The Devourers are learning." Ilara touched the scratched word. "Remember," her fingers trembling. "They are not attacking. They are reminding us that forgetting is still possible." They searched the station room by room until they found the core chamber. There in the center floated a sphere of dark energy, pulsing slowly, like a sleeping heart inside it. Flickered faint. Images, faces, voices, fragments of the missing miners. "They are not gone," Ilara whispered. "They are trapped between moments. How do we free them?" Lisa asked. "By giving them something to hold on to." Helen said, "Their names, their stories, their reasons to come." Back, so Lisa sat on the cold floor and began to speak. She told the story of the station commander, a woman named Grace who once rescued a bird with a broken wing and nursed it for weeks until it flew again. She spoke of the engineer Carlos, who sent handmade cards to his niece every birthday, even from deep space. She spoke of the cook who made soup that tasted like home, no matter where you were from. As she spoke, the sphere pulsed brighter. The images grew clearer. Ilara joined her voice, singing a Virith song of return. Helen added the names of every miner one by one. The sphere cracked, light spilled out, and one by one the miners appeared, dazed but whole. They blinked at the light, tears streaming down their faces. Not from fear, but from relief. They had been lost in a fog of forgetting, and the sound of their own names pulled them back. Grace, the commander, hugged Lisa so tight she could not breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "You remembered us." On the way back to Earth, the miners shared what they recalled. The Devourers had not harmed them. They had simply shown them a world where no one remembered their names, where their lives meant nothing. And in that emptiness, they began to fade. It was not violence. It was loneliness. Maid Lisa knew then the true battle was not in space, but in every heart on every world. The choice to remember or to look away. When they returned, the Alliance Council held an emergency session. This time, Core did not speak first. Instead, the botanist stood and told the council what he had seen in Seattle, how a simple story had healed a wound centuries old. Other representatives followed, each sharing a memory they had carried in silence. Core listened, then rose slowly, his mossy face unreadable for a long moment. Then he said, "Perhaps we have been wrong. Perhaps strength is not in forgetting pain, but in holding it gently, so others do not have to bear it alone." The council voted unanimously to protect the memory beacons. But the greatest test came, not from outside. One evening, Lisa found Ilara sitting alone on the porch, staring at the stars, her silver eyes dull with sorrow. "What is it?" Lisa asked. Ilara did not answer at first. Then she said, "My brother is gone." And Lisa sat beside her. "He was taken by the Devourers long ago." She said, "I never spoke of him because it hurt too much, but in not speaking I let him fade, even in my own mind." Lisa took her hand and said, "Tell me about him." And Ilara did. She spoke of a boy who loved to climb the crystal spires, of their home world, who made toys from starlight, who laughed like wind through chimes. She cried as she spoke, and Lisa cried with her. That night they sent his name into the stars, not as a plea but as a promise. "You are remembered." Days later, a faint echo returned, not a voice but a feeling, like warmth on skin, like a hand on the shoulder for a moment. Then gone. Ilara smiled through tears. "He heard us." From then on, the memory beacons changed. They were no longer just defenses. They became bridges. Every world added their own stories, not just of heroes, but of ordinary moments of love, of loss of hope, on Earth. Children grew up learning that their voices mattered, that a lullaby could be as powerful as a laser, that remembering someone was an act of courage. Lisa never wore her uniform again. She walked the world not as a commander, but as a listener. She sat with elders, she played with children. She held the hands of the dying and whispered their stories into recorders so they would never Be lost, Alara stayed by her side, not as a princess but as a friend, as family. And in the quiet spaces between stars, the devourers no longer drifted as hollow things. Some began to gather fragments of memory, not to consume but to keep like treasures. They played broken songs, they whispered names, they tried to learn how to feel again. No one knew if they could be healed. But for the first time, someone was trying. One night, as Lisa and Alara sat on the porch watching the sky, a single star blinked. In a pattern, they knew it was Helen sending a message from Mars. She had found a new flower blooming in the red soil. She named it the Weaver Bloom. It had petals that glowed faintly with stored light, and when touched, it hummed a soft tune. Lisa leaned, her head on Alara's shoulder, and smiled. The fight was not over, but it was no longer a fight, it was a song, and they were all part of it. And somewhere far away, a devourer heard the tune, and for the first time tried to sing along. Summer settled over Earth like a warm blanket. The memory gardens had spread to every continent. Even the deserts now bloomed with weaver flowers, their soft light guiding travelers through the night. Lisa Drew walked the coast of Maine, barefoot. In the sand, the ocean breathing beside her, she carried no title, no rank, just a small satchel filled with story seeds given to her by children. From a dozen worlds, Solara followed a few steps behind her. Silver eyes scanning the horizon, not for threats, but for beauty. She had learned to love the way Earthlight changed with the hours. How dawn painted the sky in colors no Virith artist could replicate, yet change always carried shadows. A message came from Titan, not from Helen, but from a young miner, named Dana. Her voice shaky static, cutting through her words. They found something under the ice, something that sings back, Lisa, and Alara took the lullaby again. Not as a warship, not as a rescue craft, but as a listener. They landed on Titan's frozen surface where methane rivers cut through orange plains. Dana met them at the airlock, her face pale, her hands trembling. "We were drilling for geothermal vents," she said when the ice cracked. "We heard music." They followed her deep below the surface through tunnels lit by weaver blooms that had taken root in the rock walls. The air grew warmer the deeper they went until they reached a cavern so vast its ceiling vanished in mist. In the center of the cavern rose a structure not built, but grown from ice and light spiraling upward like a frozen flame, and from it came a sound, not a song but a question, repeated in 1,000 voices. "Who remembers?" Alara stepped forward, her breath catching. "This is not Devourer. This is older Lisa." Felt it too, a pull in her chest like a half-forgotten dream. They approached slowly, the ice beneath their boots humming with each step as they neared the structure. Images formed in the air. Not on screens, but in the mist itself. Faces of beings with too many eyes, too many limbs, voices speaking in tongues long dead yet somehow understood. "We were the first teachers," the mist whispered. "We showed the weavers how to shape stars. We fell when the devourers learned to eat." Silence. Lisa reached out and touched the ice. It was warm. "You are not gone," she said. The mist swirled around her, forming a shape. A child with eyes like galaxies. It held out a hand made of frost will. "You carry us?" Lisa asked. The mist child nodded. So they gathered the memories, not in orbs but in song. Lisa sang an old Earth lullaby. Alara wove Virith harmonies. Helen, who had joined them, added Mars dust chants, and Dana, the miner, hummed a work tune her grandfather taught her. The ice structure began to melt, not into water, but into light. Each drop rising like a firefly carrying a face, a name, a moment. They filled the lullaby with this new light, not as cargo but as guest. On the return journey, the ship felt different. The walls glowed softly. The engines purred like a contented cat. Even the stars outside seemed brighter. When they reached Earth, they did not hold a gathering. Instead, they walked from town to town, village to village, releasing the light, slowly letting it find its own home. In a small town in Kansas, an old man woke to find his kitchen filled with golden mist. It showed him his wife as she was on their wedding day, laughing in sunlight. He reached out, and the mist kissed his cheek, then faded, leaving only the scent of her perfume and a single weaver bloom on his table in Tokyo. A girl playing piano heard a new melody in her head. She played it, and the room filled with the sound of 1,000 ancient instruments joining her. The Alliance watched in awe. Even Kor sent a message, not of policy, but of thanks. His people had received memories of their first cities not as ruins but as living places full of music and market noise. But the greatest change came from within. One evening, Lisa found Alara standing at the edge of the memory garden staring at a new tree. "Its leaves shimmering with faint faces, my brother is there," she said softly. "Not as a ghost but as a guide. He shows lost memories," the way Homelisa put an arm around her shoulder, and they stood in silence as fireflies made of light danced around them. Meanwhile on Mars, Helen discovered something strange. The weaver blooms were no longer just receiving memories, they were creating them. Children who spent time near the flowers began to dream in shared visions. They drew pictures of places they had never seen, of beings they had never met yet. The images matched across continents and worlds. It was as if the flowers were weaving a new story. Not of the past, but of what could be, Lisa knew. Then that the work had entered a new phase. It was no longer about recovery but creation. She called a quiet meeting, not with leaders but with dreamers, artists, teachers, children. They met under the story tree in Portland, and Lisa asked a simple question. "What kind of future do you want to remember?" A boy named Leo said. "I want to remember flying with my dog on a planet with 2 suns." A woman named Nina said, "I want to remember the day we stopped being afraid of each other." Ilara smiled and said, "I want to remember the first time a devourer laughed." So they began to plant new seeds, not of what was, but of what could be. They sang songs of cities built on clouds, of oceans that healed themselves, of wars that ended with shared meals instead of treaties. The lullaby ship carried these dreams into space, not as hopes but as blueprints, and something answered. Not from the great silence, not from the devourers, but from the void between galaxies. A soft pulse like a heartbeat matching the rhythm of human dream. Shellen detected it first. A shift in the cosmic background radiation. It now carried faint patterns that matched the children's drawings. "They are listening," Lisa whispered. "They are learning," Alara replied. On Titan, the ice cavern was gone, but in its place grew a forest of crystal trees, their branches chiming with every breeze, each note a memory, each chord a promise. Dana the miner stayed to tend them. She said the ice songs helped her remember her own grandmother's stories, and now she told them to the trees back on Earth. The story, fruits ripened, faster now, and when eaten they did not just share old memories, they sparked new ideas. A farmer in Nebraska dreamed of crops that grew in moonlight, and by spring, he had seeds that glowed softly in the dark. A teacher in Nairobi found her students could solve math problems by humming certain tunes. The galaxy was changing, not through force but through invitation. Even the devourers changed. One was spotted near the asteroid belt, not drifting alone but tending a small garden of weaver blooms. It had learned to water them with melted ice, and when a bloom wilted it would sit beside it, humming until a new sprout appeared. No one feared it anymore. Lisa and Alara visited the Alliance capital not as petitioners but as friends. They walked through halls once cold and formal, now filled with murals of shared stories. A Krell elder taught human children how to weave memory nets from starlight. A Zenth musician played duets with a Mars colony. Quercor met them in his garden where he now grew earth roses alongside Virith crystal vines. "You were right," he said simply, "about everything." Lisa smiled. "We were just the first to listen." That night they sat on the balcony of their home in Oregon, the same place where it all began, the sky full of stars. Not as distant points of light, but as neighbors do. "You think it will last?" Alara asked. Lisa watched a shooting star trace a path across the sky. "As long as someone tells a story, as long as someone listens." "It will," and in that moment, a new bloom opened. On their porch, its petals unfolding to reveal not a memory but a question written in light. "What will you remember tomorrow?" Lisa reached for Alara's hand, and together they whispered an answer. Not in words, but in the quiet certainty of shared presence. Far out in the dark, the devourer in the asteroid belt looked up as a new star blinked in a familiar pattern. It tilted its head, then began to hum a lullaby. It had learned from a dream, and somewhere in the great silence, the keeper smiled, as a new archive began to form, not of what was lost, but of what was being born. The end. Spring came to Earth with rain and green shoots pushing through old ash. Lisa Drew stood in a field outside Portland where the first memory circle had gathered. Now it was a garden rose of flowers named after the lost, each bloom carrying a story. In its color and scent beside her, Alara knelt in the soil, her silver eyes soft as she planted a seed from the Virith homeworld. It would grow into a tree that bore fruit shaped like teardrops filled with light. Helen Cruz arrived with a group of students from Mars. They carried small boxes of red soil and tiny sprouts of the weaver bloom. Already the flowers had spread to 3 colonies, their glow now a common sight in windows and gardens, but peace still wore thin edges. A new signal arrived, not from the Alliance, not from the Devourers, but from a place no one expected, the edge of the Great Silence, a region of space long thought empty. Beyond the last mapped star, a voice crackled through static, old and weary, speaking in a language that shifted like water. Yet somehow Lisa understood every word. "We hear your song," it said. "We have been waiting." Alara froze when she heard it, her hands trembling in the soil. "This is not a devourer," she whispered. "This is older." They gathered in the comms room of the old Alliance outpost, now repurposed as a memory archive. The voice came again, clearer this time. "We are the keepers of the first silence. We watched the weavers fall. We buried their songs in the bones of dead stars. We never thought to hear them again." Lisa leaned forward. "Who are you?" "We are those who chose to remember even when there was no one left to hear." Alara exchanged a look with Lisa. This was not a threat, it was a pledge. They prepared the lullaby again. Not for battle, but for meeting. They loaded it with gifts, not weapons, a recording of children laughing, a loaf of fresh bread wrapped in cloth, a vial of earth rainwater, a single weaver bloom in a glass dome. The journey took 21 days through folds of space that hummed with ancient echoes. On the 10th day, the ship passed through a cloud of dust that glittered like crushed memories. Helen ran tests and found traces of weaver DNA in the particles. They were sailing through a graveyard of songs. On the 18th day they saw it, a station not built but grown from crystalline bone, floating in the heart of the Great Silence. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm like a sleeping heart. They docked without resistance. Inside, the air was still and warm, filled with the scent of old paper and dried flowers. A figure waited, tall and bent with age, its skin like cracked parchment eyes. "Milky but kind, you came." The keeper said, its voice like dry leaves. "We heard you." Lisa replied. The keeper smiled. "You are small, so small, yet your song is loud enough to wake the dead." They walked through halls lined with shelves, not of books but of light. Each orb held a memory, a life, a moment. The keeper explained they had spent 10,000 years collecting what the weavers left behind, preserving them until someone could carry them forward. "Why us?" Lisa asked. "Because you remember how to feel." The keeper said, "The Alliance forgot the Devourers. Lost the keepers, only watched, but you live and love and mourn, and still you." Singalara touched a glowing orb and gasped within it. She saw her brother climbing the crystal spires, not as a memory, but as a living moment, preserved in perfect clarity. "He is here." The keeper said, "Not alive, but not gone, either, as long as someone remembers him. He exists in the space between breaths." Tears fell from Alara's eyes, but they were not sad tears. They were full of wonder. The keeper led them to the heart of the station, a chamber where thousands of orbs floated in silence. "This is the last archive," the keeper said. "If it is lost, all that remains of the first age will vanish." Lisa understood. Then what was being asked? "You want us to take them?" "Not all," the keeper said, "but enough to plant new gardens on living worlds. Let these memories grow in the hearts of those who still dream." So they chose carefully, not the grand battles or cosmic wonders, but the small things: a mother humming to her child, a farmer watching his first sunrise after war, a friend sharing bread in the rain. They loaded the lullaby with hundreds of orbs, each one warm to the touch. Before they left, the keeper gave Lisa one final orb. It glowed brighter than the rest. "This is yours," the keeper said. Lisa opened it and saw herself as a girl sitting on her father's lap. As he fixed an old radio, the sound of static turning into music filled her mind. She had not remembered that moment in years. "Thank you," she whispered. On the return journey, they did not speak much. They listened to the hum of the orbs like a chorus of distant hearts. When they reached Earth, they held a new gathering. Not in a field, but in cities, towns, villages, everywhere. People came with empty jars and open hearts. Lisa and Alara released the orbs, not all at once, but one by one, letting each memory find its home. A woman in Kansas received the memory of planting her first garden, and wept. A boy in Tokyo felt the joy of flying a kite for the first time and laughed out loud. The memories did not overwrite lives. They simply added color, like threads. In a tapestry, even the Alliance felt the change. Core visited Earth, not in a warship but in a small shuttle. He walked through the memory garden and stopped before a bloom, named after a Krell child lost in the integration. He touched the petals and, for the first time in his long life, he spoke a name aloud. Not as Data, but as love back on Mars. The Weaver blooms began to change their petals, now shimmered with faint images, faces from the archive smiling, waving, living again in borrowed light. Helen noticed something else. The flowers were spreading on their own, not through seeds but through sound. When someone told a story near a bloom, a new sprout appeared in the next room, as if memory itself could grow roots. Lisa knew then that the work was no longer about defense, it was about cultivation. She and Alara traveled the solar system not as leaders but as gardeners. They planted memory seeds on moons and asteroids. They sang to the void and waited for echoes. One evening on Titan, they sat under a sky thick with orange haze, watching a new bloom open its petals, slowly releasing a soft hum. Do you think they hear us? Lisa asked. Alara took her hand, always. And far away in the great silence, the keeper stood alone once more. But the station no longer felt empty. The wall still held thousands of memories, yet the silence was different now. It was not the silence of loss, but of waiting for the next song. Meanwhile, in the deep dark, a devourer drifted near a small asteroid where a single Weaver bloom had taken root. It reached out not to consume but to touch. The petals glowed brighter at its presence, and the devourer made a sound not of hunger but of curiosity. It leaned closer, and the bloom released a memory, the feeling of holding a hand in the dark, the warmth of shared breath, the simple truth that you are not alone. The devourer sat there for a long time. Then it began to hum the same tune. On Earth, children played under trees that now bore fruit filled with light. They called them story fruits, and when you bit into one, you did not taste sweetness but felt a moment, someone else's joy, someone else's courage, and for a heartbeat, you carried it as your own. Lisa watched them from her porch, Alara beside her, a cup of tea steaming in her hands. We did not save the galaxy, Lisa said softly. No, Alara replied. We reminded it how to save itself, and in that truth, they found peace not as an end, but as a practice, as a daily choice to remember to speak to, reach out to plant one more seed in the dark. The lullaby ship rested in a field now covered in wildflowers, its engines cold but its core still humming with 1,000 voices, ready not to fight but to sing whenever the night grew too quiet. And somewhere beyond the stars, a new voice joined the chorus, tentative at first, then stronger, learning the words, learning the way home. The end.